Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, but we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And welcome, everybody, to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. I know you all are very excited to see me and to hear me. If you're listening on radio, of course, you're all very, very excited. We've got a show planned for you today. And for those of you watching on TV, yes, this is a fresh haircut. That's right. I make sure I look good for you guys. Got it done just yesterday. Anyway, so on today's show, we have possibly joining us, we'll see, Chris Campbell. He's the Senate candidate for something called the Kentucky Party. He, I guess, reached out to come on the show to me, and so if we can get him on here, we're gonna ask him many questions, like what is the Kentucky Party, and those things. Very important questions, of course. If you want to join into the conversation, you can text 502-571-0970, 502-571-0970. And don't worry, if Mr. Campbell doesn't join us, that's not a problem, because I have a lot on my mind here. Of course, and I know yesterday that the host yesterday talked about this, I believe, briefly, if the show notes were accurate that were sent over. But I believe they talked yesterday about this battery plant. But man, oh man, I've got a lot of emotion and a lot of feelings about it. I know you guys do too as well. So if you want to join into that, you can text 502-571-0970. Normally, I take those text messages and the final segment, and I'll go through and answer those questions, but normally it's just me speaking. So if we do have on Chris Campbell, and he does join us, if you text in your questions there to that 502-571-0970 line, and they're questions for him or about that interview, I will handle them as they come in, of course. But otherwise, if you just have comments, concerns, questions about what I'm talking about, we handle that there in the last segment. So all very, very exciting stuff as far as that goes. Very exciting stuff, because we have corruption abound. I mean, just this morning, I made a post about $140 million of taxpayer funds going towards a particular life science center in northern Kentucky. $140 million of Kentucky taxpayer funds. That's not even including the federal dollars going towards this science center that there's one particular heavy donor who's donated near $1 million over the past 4 or 5 years, who's the main developer on this, that is profiting off this, as well as a legislator's spouse that has ownership in the operations that are receiving your state taxpayer funds. That's right. They are simultaneously voting to send the money to this development, while at the same time, they are directly profiting off the developments. It's all legal, but man, it sure does stink. It smells to high heaven. And you'd think after the Glendale plant, our people would be maybe a little bit more gun shy, especially the Republicans. They have tons of egg on their face regarding this. You think they'd be a little more gun shy about shelling out, hundreds of millions towards economic development strategies that, are essentially startups like that battery plant was. But, it is what it is, I guess. I guess we don't learn our lesson, of course. But, we'll have all that here today if Mr. Campbell doesn't join us. So you can text in. Once again, that's 502-571-0970. 0970. I do enjoy your text messages, of course. That's 502-571-0970. And if after today's show, you're like, man, I want more. I want to hear more from this guy. Well, you can also check out The Andrew Cooperrider Show by visiting theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. Just this past week, I talked a little bit about the battery factories. That was before the layoffs. And I had on Thomas Massey. I talked to him for about 30 minutes there, asking him all kinds of questions. So you can check that out. Visit theandrewshow.com. But we'll be back here in about a minute for today's show.
Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back here on Kentucky's Voice. So as I said, I know yesterday the host talked a little bit about this battery plant deal blowing up. I know it's been a little bit of the conversation, but you haven't gotten my hot takes. And there's a little bit of history here that I feel you all need to be filled in on, because there's people like me, Andrew Cooperrider, who back in 2021, before it was even announced publicly that it was a Ford battery plant, was calling this a giant boondoggle destined to fail. When the vote was taking place, and I'll go into the history of this vote and how I knew it was a bad idea based upon how it was voted on, I was calling legislators telling them, do not vote for this. Don't do it. And you may say, Andrew, how did you know this was a bad plan before you even knew the details of the deal? I didn't even know who the money was going to. And I said, this is bad. This is a problem. And he said, did you have a crystal ball? Actually, somebody asked that. They're like, well, it's easy to play armchair. When I made a post about on social media, and they're like, oh, it's easy to play armchair quarterback. What do they expect to have? A crystal ball? Like, well, I called this out way at the beginning. And I called it out before they approved it in the vote. I didn't have a crystal ball. I don't practice tarot cards. I just have, common sense. So let me explain to you how this was voted on. So come 2021, COVID's raging. We got shut down. You got vaccination. You got all these issues going on. This is at the time that hospitals were understaffed because they are firing people for not getting the old COVID shot. And so Beshear called an emergency special session, he said, to deal with those issues. And I said he said at the time because during the governor debate with Daniel Cameron, I believe it was on KET, but perhaps it was Fox affiliates debate. Beshear said, we called a special session just to approve the Ford battery plant in Glendale. So while they claimed it was for COVID, Beshear let it slip during his debate that it was called specifically for this. And how'd this vote take place? Well, guys, I hate to tell you. So out of the 138 state legislators, 138 of them, only 10 voted no-ish, 10-ish. So out of the other 128-ish that voted yes, 128, maybe 10 of them knew who they were giving the money to. That's right. They voted to authorize $410 million to be allocated for an economic development project, and the money went to, I don't know. They literally didn't know. See, members of leadership in the legislature signed an NDA to, they got read in on the details from the Beshear administration, where only about 5 of them knew. but all the other legislators that voted to send almost $500 million to an economic development project didn't know who they were giving the money to and what they were building. No wonder why it went back. That's why I was calling it out before I even knew the details. Nothing that involves giving away almost $500 million in taxpayer funds secretly, where the legislators aren't even allowed to know, is going to turn out well. Call me Nostradamus. But I think it's just a little common sense. Anytime you got to do things like that secretly, you're doing the wrong thing. But regardless, these legislators didn't know who they were giving the money to, wrote this check. And what was the deal? What were they promised? 5,000 plus jobs. They said this will be the next Toyota. Everything. Every economic project now is the next Toyota. That's the next Toyota. Brr. Every time. But regardless, they said it's going to be the next Toyota. So what do we give Ford specifically? Because Ford didn't get the full 410 in cash. No, they got $250 million in cash and then some other benefits. What happened to the other over $100 million? Well, it went to a little battery factory called AESC that, according to reporting from the New York Times, is all but belly up. They've slowed construction to nothing. They've laid off people recently in the past couple of months. And AESC is a Chinese battery company with ties to the Communist Party of China. That's right. The Republican legislators and Bashir approved sending $110 million in cash, a forgivable loan, to a Chinese Communist Party company. Now, at the time, they claimed, well, it's a Japanese company. Why? Because it was Japanese when it was founded. It's based in Japan. Yeah, but 80% of it is owned by China. Sold in 2019, before the deal was ever penned. But Ford gets $250 million forgivable loan. They got free 1,500 acres, tens of millions of dollars for a training program. You know, we talk about Brady Industries all the time. You know, that was $12 million, I believe, maybe 20. But I think it was 12. I believe it was 12 under Bevin, this big scandal. Brady Industries, $12 million down the tube. We spent tens of millions of dollars giving money to Ford and creating a special training program for Ford to train their battery plant employees on our dime, and they just fired them all. They didn't lay them off. The factory will be down for 18 months, and then they're allowed to reapply for their job. That isn't a layoff, that's a firing, and we spent tens of millions training those people. You did, I did, out of our pockets. We were promised 5,000 plus jobs, plus all the auxiliary things. See, that's the thing about auto manufacturing. It brings in auxiliary jobs. See, Toyota's worth bringing in because then you got the factory that makes the roofs, and the factory that makes the hubs, and the factory that makes the panels, and the factory that makes the brake lines, and the factory that makes all these things, and they tend to come in close too because of shipping costs. And it's because of supply on demand. They need it delivered instantaneously. Toyota doesn't keep a large stock in place, and so they need those suppliers close by to bring them the supplies. That's why they claimed it was worth giving Ford this money, because we were going to get 5,000 plus jobs, plus all the auxiliary jobs. Great idea. Except for the fact that we're not getting those auxiliary jobs, because they're shutting it down, and instead they're just manufacturing batteries by themselves. Not cars, not car batteries, not these outside supplies, but just they're retooling the factory to build giant batteries for data centers and other factories. Now, if you bother to look at the Defense Authorization Act being handled in the federal government, the number 3, I believe, line item of spending is batteries for the military. I'd hazard a guess to say that what Ford is doing is shutting down this factory and reopening it to supply those batteries to the Defense Department. And that's why they're retooling it. But you want to talk about insider trading? They knew about this. They had to have known what their plan was months ago. How do we know? Because remember, they are adding on and retooling a Ford plant here in Louisville to create a universal hybrid electric vehicle platform that then they were going to build other vehicles and their hybrid plug-in SUVs on top of. but the batteries for those SUVs was in the announcement. They said this. It wasn't coming from the Ford battery plant in Kentucky. They said the batteries would be coming from Michigan. This was months ago. So Ford knew exactly what was going to happen here months ago. Who else knew? What does Bashir do? Well, he goes on and he blames Donald Trump for taking away the electric vehicle subsidies. Hello, it's your fault. You don't have to be a genius to know. You don't sink $500 million into a battery plant operations like we did in order to bring in an industry that is literally built around the federal government having to subsidize it. If the federal government isn't essentially forcing us to buy it and isn't giving them billions of dollars in subsidies, they fail. That's a bad business model. Politics is ever changing. Maybe you shouldn't be building a business based upon, maybe you shouldn't be doing economic development based upon whether or not the federal government, through executive orders that can be undone like that, ends up continuing on with forcing Americans to buy something they don't even want. If it's such a great product worth investing in, you wouldn't need to force us to buy it. You instead, hey, let's just dump money in this. It's not a problem. And then you want to talk about crystal ball. The day it was announced exactly what the deal was, what we are getting them, what they are manufacturing, I cut a live video that day. You can go on my Facebook and see it. Poor quality. It's back before I was a little bit more professional, if that's what you want to call this. And it was back then. And I cut a live video detailing the deal of the entire deals and said, this is a bad deal. This is a horrible operation. What did we do here? You know, people want to say, look, it's, you know, they're laying off, 1,500, 1,600, but they're bringing back 2,100. For those of you who don't know simple math, 2,100 is less than 5,000. Maybe you got some thoughts on this. If you want to text over 502-571-0970. Once again, 502-571-0970. In the final segment, I'll be answering those questions. I'll probably talk about this more. Next segment, though, I believe we have Christopher Campbell on. He's part of the Kentucky Party. And if you've got questions for him, you can also text those in 502-571-0970. We'll be back shortly.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back on Kentucky's Voice, your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. If you've got questions, I have on Christopher Campbell. He's running for U.S. Senate. He's under the Kentucky Party. If you've got questions for him while I'm going through this, asking him questions, feel free to text 502-571-0970, and my producer over there will send them over to me so I can be asking Christopher for you. So that's 502-571-0970. Christopher, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Fantastic. So, Chris, let me first start off. So, obviously, in preparing for this interview, I had seen a few things here or there about the Kentucky Party, but I didn't know much about it. So, I went on the website, the Kentucky Party website, and I clicked platform, and it said coming soon. So, I guess I'll start off with my overall question. What is the platform of the Kentucky Party?
So the overarching theme of the Kentucky Party is like an anti-corruption, anti-war, pro-Kentucky theme. As far as the website and stuff goes, we had a guy who was working on the website. That guy is no longer with us, and now we're working on finding someone who can do that for us. We're basically, going by the seat of our pants right here, trying to put it all together. We have had a convention, and at that convention, we talked about what we want to do. What we want to be in the future. We do want to become a legitimate political party and a legitimate threat to the two major parties in coming elections.
So when it comes circling around to the platform, you said you guys have themes. Generally, when you look at the two major party platforms or even the Libertarian Party platform, they go through, they have a list of where they stand on different issues as far as that goes. You said the general theme is anti-corruption and anti-war, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So on that, so whenever somebody has, and I'm saying this as somebody who, and this may shouldn't come as a shock to avid listeners, I've talked about it openly, but I used to be in the Libertarian Party. And what I discovered was, now granted, I didn't necessarily agree with everything the Libertarian Party platform. I actually always agreed more with the Republican Party platform. What I found is most people don't have an issues with the platform, but they generally have an issue with the people. Would you say that's kind of accurate?
Yeah, probably. They have a pro-liberty platform, as they say, but a lot of times it doesn't seem like they want to really compete in the political arena and actually get people elected. That's actually one of the reasons why the Kentucky Party now exists. A lot of the people in the Kentucky Party were either libertarians or like Green Partiers, but they got this feeling that neither of those parties actually want to win political elections, actually get people into seats, and that's what the Kentucky Party wants to do. We want to get people elected and actually compete in the political arena.
So, but when it comes to, I guess, returning to the platform side of things, because to me, a party isn't the people in it. I'm a Christian. I believe we live in a fallen world. All falls short of the glory of God. Therefore, all of us are flawed. And so whether you look at the Democrat Party or the Republican Party and you see corruption, you see problems with politicians, that's a reflection of the human side of things. That's not a reflection of their platform. That's not a reflection of what the party's supposed to do. That's a reflection of people, quote unquote, going bad. And, I don't personally believe a third party is going to solve people going bad because it's still comprised of humans. So that's why I'm more interested in what is the exact platform of the party. What exactly are you supposed to believe in? What is it that you're supposed to be held accountable to, the same way that Republicans and Democrats have a platform that they are supposed to be held accountable to, even if the voters and, of course, the politicians fall short of that?
So we think that the two parties actually work together to actually go against what the American people believe and or what the American people want and what the Constitution says our country is supposed to be. We think they are actively involved in corruption and cover-ups that cost the American taxpayer trillions of dollars. There's a never-ending war machine that just uses American people as like fodder. And we do think that the two major parties, even though they will publicly say they don't like each other, like Dems and Republicans. You often see them as polar opposites, or like two fighters in different corners of a ring. But we think behind closed doors, they actually work together to kind of sabotage the American ideal. So getting back to
I guess, though, my point would be is that, once again, that's a people side of things. And while I believe maybe you personally might be a better person than most politicians, I think the average human on the street is probably a better person than most politicians. But at the same time, you know, there's, you know, and I find this all the time with you're not in power, so it's easy to claim, well, we wouldn't do those things. But there's no guarantees at all that once in power, you won't also do those things. You know, power corrupts.
Sure.
And so that's why, once again, you know, just returning to the platform question, that for me is always the central question when it comes to a political party, is just because what we're talking about on that side is people. And whether it's Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Kentucky Party, me, you, or anybody else, there is no guarantees that when those people gather power, they won't become corrupted. Maybe individually, we may have a guarantee within ourselves, but I'm saying that once they get power, that guarantee. So what is, so going back to let's just work through some issues here. What's the Kentucky Party's viewpoint on abortion?
So we're like total body autonomous. We believe that a person has a right to do what they want with their body. But that's something interesting about the Kentucky Party, is that you don't have to have that firm belief to be a part of the party. Again, the party's main themes are truly anti-corruption, anti-war, pro-Kentucky. So if you run as a candidate for us, as long as your platform fits within those three primary pillars, we'll usually back you, because the anti-corruption bit is where we're really focusing on finding people who, you know, actually people who want to do good for the people of America. And so we think we're pretty good at vetting candidates and finding candidates that actually will adhere to the idea that you're not supposed to be corrupt. You're not supposed to be like a warmonger. And in the end, also be pro-Kentucky, because oftentimes we get Kentucky politicians who do anti-Kentucky things.
Sure. So
I get what you're saying about people. Like, you're right. Like, I could just be like straight up lying to you right now, just trying to get in office. You're not wrong there, that people can do that. We kind of hope that we, you know, through our own processes and our own, you know, party platform, that we find good candidates that have good ideas and good intentions. You don't necessarily, and we think that because the Kentucky Party, as long as you fall into those three primary themes of anti-corruption, anti-war, pro-Kentucky, other than that, you don't have to fall into the ideology of the Kentucky Party. It would seem to me that it's not always people. I think there are some good people who get into the Republican Party as candidates or the Democrat Party as candidates, but then they fall into the party system. And I do think the parties actually make bad people much, much worse, and even some good people turn into bad people because they go into the ideology of, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican first, and we kind of fall into the thing of like, you're a human first and you're for Kentucky second. And you don't have to fall into a party ideology. We don't push any ideology on people. Like, we do have some people who are registered Republicans or registered Democrats, but they come to our meetings, our conventions, and talk with us because they're very moderate in their belief systems.
So, you know, we've got about a minute left in the segment, and then we had to go to a break. Now, you know, we just kind of started talking about some of the key issues that a lot of voters are going to want to know about, because, you know, obviously when it comes to securing votes, you know, because I know you said, hey, look, outside these three things, we don't per se care about this, that, or this, that. The issue is that obviously in order to pass a piece of legislation, you know, in Senate, you got to get 51 votes. In Congress, you got to get whatever half of, well, 60 votes technically. But anyways, in Senate, and in Congress, you got to get whatever half of 435 is 200 and whatever. The point is you got to get there. And so a part of that, when we talk about these different issues like right to life or not, I think they are pretty important. So I actually want to return to some of those top line issues when we get back. Right now, we're talking to Chris Campbell. You can text in your questions, 502-571-0970. We'll be back in a few short minutes.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back on Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooper. We're joined by Christopher Campbell. He's the U.S. Senate candidate representing the Kentucky Party, a new party here in Kentucky. Before the break, we were discussing what exactly does the Kentucky Party believe. And we are going through some issues there. And, of course, one of the first issues I asked about was the right to life, about do you believe in abortion or not? Chris, your response was that you believe in total bodily autonomy. And I want to explain why. And I know, once again, having been a third-party person, I've been in the debate rooms of the Libertarian Party. I've been around these people. And I know one of the talking points and things they mention so often is about that. Well, a lot of time abortion's used to separate people. When you look at what people actually do, it's used as a political tool, et cetera, et cetera. The reason why, for me, right to life is so important is because it literally defines whether or not you believe, when you believe humans have value, do they have value? What does it mean to be a human? And when we're talking about rights, as far as that goes, what rights do people have? I think that really falls into that category where we have to ask the question of, well, when do rights begin? And if the argument and if the belief is, well, maybe rights begin in the womb, maybe they don't, you could see how that's a breaking point for a lot of people where they tend to not trust. And if they're pro-life and they see somebody who's, doesn't value and doesn't view life in the womb as life worth protecting, well, they tend to not trust an individual. They tend to look at them as maybe even anti-human. What would be your response to that?
So, lived in Kentucky my whole life, and I've watched Kentucky representatives and congressional members, either in the assembly or at the federal level, use the right to life or a pro-life agenda as their a beacon that they are pro-human rights. But I've also seen those same politicians and even people in everyday life, like my own family, who will value a fetus in the womb, but don't necessarily value their children once they're born at the same level. And I see a lot of people who are negligent.
You're saying they want to murder their children when they're born?
Not murder. That's not what I'm saying. So they're negligent. Like they don't parent them well. And
I think bad parenting is a far difference from murdering a human being.
Yeah, fair. But what I'm saying is that people that have been elected will use the abortion argument to say that they're pro-human rights, but then they don't push policies and initiatives for childcare. Not in this state. I haven't seen it from McConnell. Don't see much from Paul.
Returning to that, though, so they don't push policies that are pro-human rights, and you point to childcare. I mean, childcare is something you receive from someone else. Definitionally, it can't be a right. I mean, we outlawed slavery a long time ago in this country. You can't have a right to someone else's labor.
Oh, well, no, just what I mean is that there isn't like a standard of what a parent is supposed to be their kid, and politicians don't push for maternity leave or paternity leave in a lot of cases. They don't see Medicare as a basic human right, and so I don't see that they're pro-human just because they're anti-abortion.
I understand that. I guess what I'm pointing to, because once again, you said, Medicare, human right, right?
Yeah.
Once again, that's something you receive from someone else. It's someone else's labor. So unless we're advocating for at the end of the day, and we can go into Medicare and Medicaid if you want, because there's a lot of math there that doesn't math very well. But the point is that at the end of the day, we're receiving this care from someone else. So unless you're willing to put a gun to a doctor's head and say, if you don't treat this person, you're depriving them of their rights, so we're going to shoot you, then it's not a human right, because that's how we treat it. When somebody is depriving somebody of a right, the right to liberty, for an example, they're kidnapped. The right to life, they get murdered. The right to property, they get stolen from. We treat that as a crime with punishment. So if you're going to describe healthcare as a human right, then when people deny that healthcare, like a doctor, then you're saying that person should be punished. But doesn't that doctor have a right to their labor?
Yes, in some situations, yes. And I'm a pro-Medicare for all person, so that the government would be making the prices, and they would also be the ones as a single-payer option that would take care of the prices for that. But getting back to where you mentioned property, then I would refer back to the Constitution when discussing abortion. The Constitution does say private property, and we consider punishing or attacking someone as assault or battery. So we believe that a person's body is private property to an extent. So why would that not include their womb?
Well, I think the question here and the real debate isn't one of a political one, but rather the real debate is, where do you think life begins? I mean, if you don't think the life in the womb is a life, then yeah, I mean, you don't think you're ending a life for the sake of someone else's. However, if you view that as a human life, well, in the same way that you're not allowed to kill your children, you can't kill a child in your womb just because you're providing them subsistence. You're providing subsistence to your children when they're 5. You're not allowed to kill them then.
No, but you can provide them poor substance, and people don't consider that child abuse. I'm just saying it doesn't seem that.
I mean, there is a crime of child neglect. Now, whether or not it's enforced properly and everything else, we can have that conversation if you want to. But there is a crime on the books
as much as the abortion thing. I don't hear people complain as much about kids not being taken care of as good, or as seen as the government's job to protect children, but they think it's the government's job to ensure that abortions don't occur.
I think people do think it's the government's job to protect all life, whether that's children or adults. I mean, I think part of the reason why you hear so much about abortion, because putting in the mind of somebody who believes that a child in the womb is a human life that has value, right? And then you look in the U.S. and you see that there is, let's see, according to Center for Disease Control, in 2021, there were 625,000 abortions. So we view that as 625,000 child murders. And, you know, while granted, children are neglected, they're not fed, everything else, there is crimes for that. I mean, how many children, though, have died in the U.S. from malnutrition a year?
Yeah.
I mean, it's far less than 625,000, right?
I'm sure.
So you could see why I would care.
With murder, as long as it's not murder that they don't like. Plenty of people get on board with murder when it comes to warfare.
People do. I agree. Now, there is a lot of people within the Republican Party, such as myself, that do view that as ghoulish and don't get on board with things like, going to these endless wars and killing innocents in war and et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of people. And as I said at the beginning, I understand that a lot of times this is just part of the debate, because obviously for my listeners, things like the right to life, that's an important issue for them. It's an important issue. To me, it's really the basis of a lot of political thought. This is why I had a lot of issues with the Libertarian Party. Because if you don't view that as a life, and you can't clearly, and you haven't thought about when does a life begin, what constitutes somebody having value? When do they have value? When do they have rights? If that hasn't been deeply pondered.
But I can honestly say that I think that the mother carrying the child has more rights than the fetus. I do believe that. And I do believe a lot of times we look at women as people until they're pregnant, and then we look at them as vessels. And I say that coming from someone who's lived in the South his whole life, been around Baptists and Catholics, and they consistently have that view where women are people, then when they're pregnant, they're vessels. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I think in the vast majority, and obviously you've seen Trump run on exceptions for rape and incest. So we can't say there's a Republican consensus per se. There is in Kentucky, but a Republican consensus per se on that issue. But on 99.9% of abortions are done for reasons outside of rape or incest. And people like myself, especially in those situations, would say, look, the mother made a choice to have a child, to get pregnant, to have sex. That leads to children. And the ramifications of that is you get pregnant, you have to take care of a child, and just because you don't want to take care of that child, you don't get to murder it.
That's fair enough, but a lot of those same people would say it's okay to murder kids in warfare and not blink an eye. Maybe you're different, Andrew. Maybe you are.
Oh, I'm definitely different.
Maybe some libertarians or Green Partiers are, to where they're anti-murder across the board. but I have yet to meet that person who's anti-murder and pro-human rights across the board. And when I see that person, maybe then I'll concede some of the stuff on the abortion thing, but I can't until I meet that person. And I'm speaking even for myself because I'm a veteran and stuff too. So, I mean, there are situations where, like any war, regardless of how you feel about the people, that is just government-sanctioned murder. It just is. That is our government saying, these people are bad, we're going to go kill them. Even if the majority of the people killed in that war had nothing to do with the terrorist attack or the bat or whatever it is we're focusing on, a lot of people will die. And this is where I get where I can't be a Republican or a Democrat, even though I've had a lot of Democrats try to invite me to join their party, is that as much as people want to defend him, Barack Obama was the #1 pro-drone strike president, and he was the one who used the term collateral damage. So, again, when we get back to the abortion, when we look at people through their lives, they will justify murder or abuse or anti-human rights in any situation except that one. And that's fine if you think that a child in the womb is sacred, but unless you consistently think the child in the womb is sacred, the child born is sacred, the adolescent, the young adult, the old adult, like life is pure the whole line through, like needs to be protected, then I don't really think it's fair for you to say that that it's sacred when it's in the womb, but once it's born, it's not anymore. And that's what I see from politicians consistently. They don't actually give a damn about Americans once they're alive. They need to use them for something.
Well, Chris, where can people find out more about you?
Facebook,
30 seconds,
Campbell for Congress 2026 is the primary one. I also have a Substack.
Campbell for
Campbell
Congress on Facebook, you said?
Yeah, it's like all caps, Campbell, my last name, the numeral 4, Congress, and then 2026.
Okay, so that was Chris Campbell. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you there with that discussion. Just, perks the interest. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. We'll have to have you maybe back on. We can continue this discussion, but we'll be back in a few minutes.
Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio online at kyvoice.org.
And welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. Some of you might have questions for me. You might have some thoughts. You can text that over 502-571-0970, 502-571-0970. Regardless whether you agree or disagree with Christopher Campbell, at least he reached out and is trying to get his message out there, even going into a little bit of a viper pit there for a minute. But, that's what happens sometimes. So I do appreciate that. I appreciate anybody willing to at least have a conversation. So if you have thoughts, questions, concerns, once again, that's 502-571-0970. I do want to return to economic development talks real quick, because obviously I started off the show talking about the Glendale plan. I know it's been talked about a lot. A lot of people have covered it, but I do think it is worth mentioning exactly how all of it happened, because when you look at exactly the breakdown. When you look at the breakdown, sorry, hold on. Somebody did have a comment. I'm sorry. Somebody had a comment. It's live radio, so when somebody texts in, I like to handle it. That's what I do in this final segment. Once again, if you have your thoughts, 502-571-0970. Someone commented, said he actually believed war are killing innocent people. How about letting them march onto our beaches and start killing our people? Does he care about war then? So I think that's a really interesting point. We didn't get a chance to really debate some of that because a lot of times, and I'm not going to speak for Chris, though, once again, in case you couldn't tell by the fact that I already knew somewhat of what he was going to say, I have debated with these people before. And one of the things when they talk about state-sanctioned murder, they'll be against, for an example, the death penalty. They'll say, well, you're pro-life in a womb, but you're for the death penalty. Well, you're not really pro-life across the board. You're for state-sanctioned murder. However, the difference is, and it's a simple difference, but it can sometimes be conceptually hard to understand, and I think this ties into the war question. And I know now we're getting philosophical. But there are actions a human takes that means they get deprived of a right. For an example, if somebody steals from you, they take away your right, we take away their right. Not their right to life, but their right to liberty. We put them in, well, if it's Louisville, we don't put them in jail. We tell them, hey, take it, calm it down. And then we send them right back on the street to steal again. And then about the 30th time, we say, okay, here's an anklet. And then about the 35th time, by that time, they're shooting people. And we're like, how'd this happen? Why didn't we take this criminal off the street? But there are actions people take that are their own choices that has ramifications. You make a decision, you have ramifications to that decision. You decided to deprive somebody of their right to property, you stole from them, you should be deprived of your right to liberty by being put in jail for a set amount of time. That's the punishment. And so if you're somebody who's deprived several people of their right to life, well, shouldn't you be deprived of your right to life? I know that's something to ponder, and that's something that'd be a greater debate, but it is worth mentioning. And so in the same way, war, when it comes to war. Now, granted, nowadays, especially with the technology we have, there's this book. I encourage you guys, and I know I'm getting off board here with this war thing, but it's worth talking about. There's this book called The Anatomy of the State, and they talk about, it's by Murray Rothbard, and he talks about how wars used to be fought in this manner, where the armies would meet on a battlefield somewhere, and they would fight each other there, and the only people killed were those choosing to engage, or sometimes forced by the guy, but the people involved with the actual war, the people taking actions that are depriving them of their quote-unquote rights in that case, a self-defense. And so in the same way, when we're talking about war, if you can argue something is truly a self-defense war, and that's everything's debatable, of course, but in that case, there is, I believe, certain justifications for war, such as a defensive war, a war where we clearly have a situation where they are clearly setting up and going to invade the U.S. or something like that. A war that obviously protects the rights of our citizens, essentially, protects our Constitution. There are unjust wars that America, I believe, historically has engaged in at times. And I understand that thought. However, at the same time, to say that war is never just is and this is the thing too, not once again getting philosophical, but we live in a fallen world. If you're a Christian, you accept the fact we live in a fallen world. We all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Therefore, bad things happen in this world. And if you're going to sit there and say that I want everything to be clean and perfect, I basically, whether they're communists or ultra libertarians, a lot of times they live in a fantasy world that just doesn't exist. And I live in this world, the real world, where real things happen. Therefore, we have to respond in a real way. But I guess that's enough philosophy for me on that issue. Here we go. We got another text here that says, your guest is wrong about war. Read the Bible. The only perfect world is in heaven. What did I just say? Thank you, texter, for backing me up. That's what I just said. And also, yeah, read the Bible. What is it? It's a scripture in Psalms. Blessed is he who prepares my hands for war and my fingers for battle. I believe that's the verse. If I misquoted it, don't be too hard on me. But it is a Psalms. It's actually etched onto the spring plate on the back of my Glock. But anyways, but yeah, I mean, read the Bible. He talks about it all the time. The Bible talks about if you don't have your sword, I believe the verse, now I'm getting horrible with Bible verses, but I believe the verse is, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Like, we are biblically commanded to be prepared to go to battle if needed. Just saying. So, that's that universal truth in a way. If you want to talk about Luke 22:36, there we go. Thank you. If we want to talk about, parties and this or that, they have platforms, they have this belief, that belief. We're all still people. And as people, generally speaking, if there's one truth we can subscribe to, and I would encourage you to, would be biblical truths. That's your never changing, your clear guide. If you're ever unclear about it, well, you can pray about it. And so, I don't know. That's just kind of, whenever you talk to people, and I don't know anything about any of my guests' faith or anything else, but you do find there are people who struggle with faith. And now I'm getting way off into the philosophical side of things. But when we talk about COVID, and this came up, and this is what I was thinking about, all during COVID, I thought to myself, and I realized, wow, there's a lot of people who are really uncomfortable with the idea of dying. And is that because they're really uncomfortable with their faith? And whenever you see those types of lockdown tyrannical actions or anything about, we need to keep you safe, the people calling for that, I so often think you're not really comfortable in your faith. You don't have that never-ending trust in God. You don't have that belief that this is but a temporary world. You're having a crisis of faith, really. But yeah, that's just off the cuff there. But any other thoughts people have? 502-571-0970. Once again, that's 502-571-0970. Getting in the text here. Oh, wow. Getting in the text. Okay. Yeah. Could you imagine asking the Muslim terrorists, meet us on an island to fight it out? I mean, yeah, that's the point, right? I mean, we live in a completely different world. Now, I think as technology increases, obviously we can be a little more precise, right? But at the same time, yeah, I mean, there what we're dealing with in this world. I mean, we have terrorist plots being thwarted around right now. I mean, you've got France can't even right now they can't go to their New Year's celebrations. They have to watch from indoors because they're worried about being bombed or shot by some terrorist in France. I mean, this is the fact of the matter. I mean, we are involved in a guerrilla warfare of sorts, and that leads to obviously some difficult situations. And I think if you think this world's, once again, if you think this world's black and white, as you'd like it to be, like I said, you're having a little bit of a crisis of faith, perhaps, where you don't realize the kind of world we live in and why we live in that world. But anyways, after being derailed with a philosophical question, I haven't really had a guest on this show before where I kind of debated him a little bit. So it was a little bit different for most of you. You've probably never seen the debate side of me. I think though, where I got to be honest with you, where I was kind of somewhat libertarian, I guess, never agree with the platform, but I just really dislike the politicians and the Republican Party, and that's where I had the epiphany that I was just arguing about. I can admit as a man when I was wrong, and what I was wrong about was the idea that somehow a party dictates human beings, and it's not that parties are just platforms and we're all human. And there's no guarantee with a new party that humans will stop being human. In fact, the opposite guarantee. Humans will always be humans. And so because of that, because I was exposed to that, I sat around in these rooms with these people debating. You know, nobody can debate better than a former libertarian. I tell you that much. Because that's, as Chris Campbell was talking about, they really weren't interested in winning elections. What they're really interested in is sitting around and debating ideas out. And that leads to questions. And so sometimes you can be a little unprepared, especially if you didn't realize that the person had struggled with these own thoughts of third parties. What's the use of a party? What does a party mean? What do people mean? What is the purpose of versus a platform versus a party? What's it all about? And granted, there's a lot of politicians out there that use parties to gain power. They ignore the platforms, but at the same time, that's because, once again, we are all just human. Well, if you like what we talked about here, I'll be talking more about economic development struggles in Kentucky on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. You can check it out, theandrewshow.com. Otherwise, I believe I'll be back here next week.